I'm gonna jump into the questions. So I'm the fashion features editor at Teen Vogue, and I feel like our #1 search topic is careers, right? Everyone wants to know what they're gonna do with their life, what path they wanna take. So I wanna start out asking about you guys' career journey and how you got to this point. And I know, Camila, you're still in school, but already your career is taking off. So why don't we start with you?
Sure. So fair trade is my life. Literally born into the movement. And it's been incredible. I mean, I think that it's a blessing to be able to actually do trips to origin, to be able to go to Nicaragua and see my family twice a year, be able to spend time in the countryside, meet our producers, factory workers. Honestly, the trips are just not, I can't even describe how incredible they are, but that's kind of where I began. Growing up and in high school, I did a lot of trips with my dad and a bunch of fair trade organizers. And then in high school, as a sophomore, I decided to start my campaign. I heard about fair trade campaigns, and I was like, oh yeah, grassroots organizing, I'm down for it. So Berkeley High School is one of the biggest public high schools in California, and I think in the country. And we had no fair trade presence at all. So it's kind of what's wild to me because Berkeley High School is such a progressive, socially active school. And so it was super easy to start a campaign. I recruited my softball team. It's my first 5 members. But you know, after 2 years, it was like a full-blown 30-person club, and we got the title of the 23rd Fair Trade High School in the country, which was amazing. So, and after that, I graduated. I came to Brown. It was about my 4th day at school, and I get a tap on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's this girl named Emily Ma. And she's like, I know you. And I was like, oh, hello, nice to meet you. And she says, so do you want to start a campaign with me for fair trade? And I was like, I guess so, yes. And so we co-founded this campaign, and she tracked me down with Kylie's help. And we've been on this journey with Brown Dining, trying to figure out how to bring fair trade to our school in a more institutional way, and that's where I'm at.
Awesome, that's so great. What about you, Sam?
First, I just want to say it's so cool to be here. It is so cool to be here. It is my first fair trade conference, and yeah, I have been just blown away by the people. Obviously, the panel. You all are amazing.
Besties.
Yeah, and for me, how many of you, if you can, by a show of hands, how many of you are students? Okay. So for me, my North Star has really always been helping young people own your voice and your power to make a difference. That is really why I'm on the planet, and it started for me when I was growing up, I was really shy. So I had like 2 friends in high school. I had 1 date all 4 years. It was a blind date for senior prom.
Oh
I was
gosh.
too shy to ask the girl I liked. I got set up with someone else. And and I barely got into college. I applied to a bunch. Most of them rejected me. And then, so you're probably wondering why they invited me on the panel. But what ended up happening was, I read 2 books that changed my life. One book that I always recommend to everyone is Mountains Beyond Mountains. And this book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, is about a Dr. Paul Farmer and organization Partners in Health. And then I read a book, The End of Poverty, by an economist, Jeffrey Sachs. Those 2 books really introduced me to extreme poverty in the world that we live in. And so when I was 19, are any of you 19 by a show of hands? Just out of curiosity. So for you, when I was your age, I read these 2 books, picked up the phone, cold called this world famous economist, Jeff Sachs, went down to Columbia University 2 days later. I said, I'm a university sophomore, I don't have many answers, but I know our generation can do more. I know we can do more to tackle extreme poverty, advance the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, now the Sustainable Development Goals, and I want to figure out what small role we might play on our campus. Started small-scale public health fundraisers, then in the fall of '07 convened students from all across the city of Boston. And we said, look, we're all focused on injustice, but we're doing this work in silos. Those silos minimize impact, minimize diffusion of knowledge. What would happen if we teamed up? And 6 months later, we had our first conference at MIT. 1,000 student leaders showed up from around the world with Paul Farmer, Jeff Sachs, a little-known singer named John Legend, the head of USAID. Paul, Jeff, and John joined our board of advisors and said, let's build this student network on poverty. I said, I'm 20 years old. I don't even know what this is yet. But okay, let's give it a shot. And we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary at MCN. We've trained over 6,000 young people to have deeper social impact in their communities, and 75% of them are now in social impact careers.
Wow.
So that's how we got where we are.
So inspiring. So tell us about chocolate, Ben.
Well, it didn't start in chocolate.
Wow.
I am a student activist turned social entrepreneur. I remember freshman year in college feeling excited and lost, as we all do in college. I joined the juggling club and German club on campus to help me find my way. And I remember sitting in my dorm Googling fair trade at college. I had been a fair trade advocate for a few years before that and didn't really think it would follow me to school. And I Googled it and came across, sure enough, fair trade colleges and universities. And I remember calling Parker Townley, who I did see in the audience. There he is. And we had a chat about what it would take to kind of start a campaign and grow a movement on campus where there wasn't one already. And I didn't know that I wanted to be an entrepreneur in my life, but this was my first project that I could really get my hands dirty on. From there, I spent 4 years in school really growing a movement on our campus, increasing the product availability in our campus dining services, educating students about fair trade at events, and incorporating it into the classroom. And it became a really meaningful part of my experience in school. And it gave me so many skills that I still use today, especially in business. So we are all student, or not all, but most of us in the audience, as we just saw, are student activists. And you guys can use that title and that platform to grow so many skills for whatever work that you are going into. Communication being probably one of the top skills that you will be learning as a student activist. Understanding how to communicate a message and share a story with lots of other students. These are like some of the invaluable skills. It wasn't until my senior semester in college where I was kind of having an identity crisis, like what am I good at? What am I doing when I graduate? I think a lot of us in this room are having those same questions. I still have those questions today, even though I'm not a student anymore. And I decided that I really wanted to do something that could create a difference and could use some of the skills that I learned on campus. And I decided to start a healthy candy company, which kind of morphed over time into chocolate, realizing that most candy that's packed with lots of sugar isn't actually healthy. So the oxymoron became true, and we shifted very quickly to chocolate. And we learned about the cacao fruit and the other ingredients that you add to chocolate that can actually make it healthy and delicious and guilt-free. And so upon graduating college, I was plowing forward with this idea, testing recipes in a commercial kitchen with a hairnet on. Really great pictures on the internet if you want to find them. And at the same time, I accepted a fellowship to live in Germany for a year with the government. And it was kind of a really scary time in my life, starting a company and leaving the country at the same time. But I understand that message of insecurity can really resonate with an audience like you guys, finding your way. And I want you to know that the journey in our careers are going to be so different and so windy. You just got to keep going forward and learn along the way.
Yeah, very true. So that kind of leads me to my next question about how your perspective on advocacy changed as you went through different stages of your life. So Camila, with you going from high school to college, Sam from campus to nonprofit, and Ben from college to social entrepreneurship. So you want to start?
Well, in high school, I don't think I realized that other people cared about anything other than themselves. I mean, because you're a teenager, you're going through all of these different things. I felt like, I was passionate about these things because they're values, right? They're beliefs that I've grown up with. And when you meet people and you hear their stories and you meet their families and you see their kids that are going to school because of a movement like fair trade, it hits home, obviously. So I, in high school, was like, how do I figure out how to share the story and connect my peers to producers all the way across the world without taking them there myself. So that was kind of my focus in high school, and also realizing that like students aren't apathetic at all. The youth are the change makers, and coming to college, I realized that people had more time to dedicate to activism and to organizing, and the biggest perspective shift for me though was the idea of like institutionalizing a movement like fair trade. In my college, we have a dining service that wants to make change, but they really, really need you to push them. Like, whew. I mean, negotiations, persistence, like it's a lot of talking. And I've learned that you really have to be patient, and that bureaucratic, institutional change takes time. But it's really, really important. It's an important part of the movement that I think I was not really thinking about before when I was tabling and yelling at kids to buy fair trade chocolate. So definitely.
Yeah. Cool. What about you, Sam?
I think honestly the biggest thing for me, about 2 years ago we did a strategic planning process, which sounds super boring, but what it really amounted to is we interviewed former student leaders of student movements. So we talked to leaders in the civil rights movement, in the movement to end apartheid. DeRay this morning talked about visiting the Apartheid Museum in South Africa, and I didn't know the history, and so we spoke to the former student body president at UC Berkeley, and at the peak in the mid-1980s, there were 155 campuses that were mobilizing to divest from the apartheid regime in South Africa. And at Berkeley alone, there were, I mean, if you can imagine this, at Berkeley, a single campus, 7,000 young people rallying. And because these 7,000 young people rallied and community members rallied, I got to speak with him just before he passed away last year. Ron Dellums, he was the congressman. He overturned a presidential veto on sanctions. It was the first time that a foreign policy veto had been overturned in the 20th century. And that was young people. That was young people using their voice, and that was before Facebook and Instagram. That was just understanding an issue 7,000 miles away and saying, what's happening there matters to us. And so I think the biggest thing, my biggest learning has been how much power we have. Not that young people alone are going to shift narrative and policy, but that intergenerational movements do. And that's something that I think the disservice that is done is so often we don't learn that history of what young people have historically done. Because what we're doing today is building on that history.
Right. Yeah. Great.
You know, for me, coming from college into becoming a social entrepreneur, it might seem like a huge shift in your life. As a college student, we kind of get a lot of flack for being idealist in nature. And for me, as a social entrepreneur, I remained the idealist. I mean, that's really what social entrepreneurship is all about, a win-win among business and doing social good and creating impact. So for me, those have never been, mutually exclusive. They've always kind of worked together. And the shift coming from college into social entrepreneurship was kind of represented by that. Although I will say, in a more career sense, in college I felt kind of independent and really discovering myself and exploring different opportunities on campus and off. And coming into entrepreneurship has been really challenging for me on both a professional and personal level. I want to be so openly authentic and truthful with all of you because entrepreneurship is often really glamorized, and it's not always that way in the everyday entrepreneur's life. I live at home. People think, I'm up in some fancy apartment in New York City and living the life and meeting fancy people, and I live at home. And it's really hard, dirty work to build something from scratch. It's also really rewarding. But the shift for me from college to social entrepreneurship was almost a reverse. I see friends climbing corporate ladders and living their best life and going out there and doing what is said to be maybe a traditional lifestyle. And for me, it isn't that way, but I still live that real idealistic life, and I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think you're making a difference, and that is so valuable and so important. So speaking of which, I have so much faith in the youth working at Teen Vogue and the way our readers think and the way they're so passionate and the way they put everything on the line to make a difference. It really inspires me. And I wanted to ask you guys, because I think in the room, just having so many students, we're looking at the future of the fair trade movement. What are you guys' hopes for the future in fair trade? What do you want to happen, let's say, 10 years from now?
I mean, I think we all want fair trade to be the norm, right? I can't even imagine how incredible it would be to not have to choose between an item that has been brought to our grocery stores because of child labor versus everything is fair. And obviously, our definition of fair and the issues that we're going to encounter is constantly evolving, and I think that's why our movement is incredible, because it's constantly evolving, and we're adapting to new problems. I want it to be the norm, and I want it to be the norm in every single neighborhood in the US and all across the world. I feel like that's kind of my major mission with fair trade is making it all-inclusive for everyone. And yeah, I want my kids to be able to trust where their food's coming from and know that the people that made them are living better lives.
Yeah.
Well, I'm new, so I'm really excited to help grow the movement over the next decade. Let me ask the audience a question. Does anyone here know how many people serve in the Peace Corps every year? Take a guess. Someone throw out a guess. 3,000? 100,000? 5,000? 6,000? So the Peace Corps annually in each class, it's about 7,300. And I could go through the list, like Teach for America is about 5,000, etc. And I ask this question at so many events, and usually people will say 100,000, 50,000, 20,000. It's small groups of people. It doesn't take tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to actually shift narrative and ultimately shift policy. And so I'm really excited because coming here and seeing this, what you've created, the movement, it's already here. Yeah. A lot of people, they're trying to create something from nothing. The movement is already here. You are the movement. So I think what I'm most excited about is, of course, breadth and growing it, but even more importantly, I think it's depth. It's telling the stories of what is already working, getting them mainstream in the public, in the zeitgeist, which is why Teen Vogue, you being here is so important. Because all of a sudden, when people start having these conversations and we're telling our friends about it, that's where all of a sudden, 10 years from now, it is just the norm. Right. And I think that's very much possible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. And I totally echo really what both of you are saying. Camila, I think if I had it my way, if we had it our way, fair trade would be a standard among everything. And I'm sorry, Fair Trade USA would be out of a job. I think that is, honestly what they're working towards, not having to be there. And that's so important to have that vision and to really work towards that. But as we get there, maybe across these 10 years, I want to make sure that we're really celebrating the successes of fair trade and the successes of the movement as a whole, and really of the vision for creating impact and creating a better world that we want to live in. So I think celebrating the successes along the way is so important, and really championing those successes and using them as models for not only the movement within food and supply chains and how we deal with workers in the developing world, but also how we deal with people in our lives, being a fairer citizen to the world.
Okay. Absolutely. One thing I'll say is reading the headlines. I'm like always on Twitter, and I get so depressed when I see headlines about climate change. It's really terrifying to me. So knowing that we're up against so much, like there's so much that we have to change in terms of the narrative, what the public thinks, saving the environment, like they're really lofty goals in a way. So what keeps you guys pushing and fighting for change when that change is slower, right? And it's like a slow build. How do you stay motivated?
Patience. My team, honestly, my team at Brown, my peers from high school, all the people that have kind of like contributed to my journey along the way. My dad, obviously, my family. It's important to know, I feel like, in these types of movements that we're not alone. I mean, this is an entire family, right? We're all working towards very similar goals, even if we have our little, our niche, our fighting modern day slavery versus sustainable environmental practices. Like, we're all united. And that also to me is very comforting. Seeing all of you here, being able to come here. This is my second year at this conference, and every year I meet the most incredibly inspiring people. I mean, you're all just incredibly inspiring, and I appreciate that. And also, more importantly, it's our producers. I mean, we had incredible speakers yesterday, and learning about like these women's initiative programs, single mothers being able to send their kids to school and actually be able to run their own co-ops. That to me is the most inspiring, hearing their stories.
Yeah.
For me, I hold two truths that may seem to conflict. One is that none of this matters, and the second is that it's the only thing that does. In terms of none of this matters, there's a book, I don't know if anyone's heard of this book, Sapiens, but I've been reading it, I love it, and what it shares is the universe is 13.8 billion years old. 13.8 billion years. If we're lucky, maybe we hit 100, 110, 120, maybe. The point is, we think that we're all so important. We're not. The world will pass us by, but as much as I want to say none of it matters, I had an experience when I was 18 years old. I was walking along the street in Washington, D.C. in the bitter cold of January, and I came across a man who was homeless. And normally I would walk right past him, pretend he didn't even exist. But in this one moment, I chose to sit down with him and share lunch. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, I asked him, I said, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I want to know, how do you survive? And he looked back at me, and he looked at the passerby, and he said, I'm not afraid to talk to anyone. I'm not afraid to look up at those above me and ask for help. Never be afraid to talk to anyone. And that single piece of advice, never be afraid to talk to anyone, it's the best piece of advice I've received in my entire life. People would tell us that somebody who's homeless or marginalized or oppressed is somehow less than. And it's a falsehood. And in that one experience, I just realized how much I was missing out on if I listen to the social norms that we're all expected and conditioned to live through. And so I think what gives me hope is just realizing he had to make the choice to ask for help, literally for survival. And so if we're really going to be in solidarity with people and affirm their dignity, then we have to have the courage and the moral courage to actually step up, make the asks when we know that we must do them. Because this work really does matter, and that's what sustains me.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think for me, coming from a brand's perspective, it sounds super cliche, but our customers really keep us going and keep us motivated. And it's funny, I think there's maybe two types of customers that we have, and one of them is, you know, the person who says, great, you're fair trade, or oh, you're a vegan product, I love vegan chocolate, or I'm trying to be healthier, so I want to choose your chocolate. And they find us because, you know, our brand and our message really resonates with them. And those are great customers for us. But arguably, the customers that I love even more are the ones who I get to share a story with and start to tell them about the importance of chocolate, the importance of cacao farmers, the importance of using healthier and better for you ingredients, and creating a brand that actually has a story. These are the customers whose hearts and minds that we are slowly changing. And that, to me, really keeps me going. Because I know that the work that we're doing is starting to create a little bit of a difference. Maybe it's 1 by 1, maybe it's 10 by 10, and maybe it keeps growing slowly. But you can never get a bad customer if you look at it that way.
Yeah, so true. So I want to shift gears a little bit. In addition to chocolate, I have a very strong love of fashion. And shameless plug, but Camila did an amazing op-ed for us on Teen Vogue that you guys all have to read, just talking about sustainability in general. But one of the things you mentioned was clothing and shopping. And one of the things I hear the most from Teen Vogue readers is that sustainable fashion is too expensive for me. I buy fast fashion because, you know, I can afford it and I can't find any sustainable brands that are affordable. I also hear that sustainable brands aren't stylish, that they're granola, that they don't pay attention to trends, and we all know that's not the truth, right? What response would you give to someone who said that to you and feels that way about sustainable fashion?
I mean, you can find mom jeans at Madewell. Let's just put that out there. Yeah, I get this question a lot too on campus, and especially because fashion is so new to the fair trade movement, I definitely understand where the questions are coming from, and I know that there is definitely a road to develop, but it's developed by demand, right? So if we as consumers are asking for more fair trade clothing, then there will be more options. Right. But I have two responses that I always give to this. My first one is, if we're thinking about the consumer cost, fast fashion, you're buying, what, a new shirt every couple weeks, every month. You're going through it, it's probably falling apart within a few months, and then you go buy a new one. So to me, that's not very cost effective either. You're just purchasing a bunch of very, very cheap clothing that's not going to last you very long, and that has an entirely different cost behind it. So that's always my second question, like, what's the true cost of what you're buying? The factory in Bangladesh that killed 2,000 people in 2013, like, that's what happens. And I think that when we're thinking about clothing and factory standards, it's really important to consider those costs. For example, matcha clothing.
Yes.
I mean, this clothing is beautiful. It's definitely stylish. I don't think it's granola, but I mean, the more companies that are jumping on this, like Madewell and J. Crew and Patagonia, they're really mainstreaming this sustainable way of purchasing quality clothing that's going to last you much longer. And there's a story behind it, and you're actually doing something to contribute to those factory workers. So I feel like that's compelling enough to me.
Yeah.
And hopefully, as we keep institutionalizing and normalizing fair trade clothing, there will be different brands that can also make it cheaper.
Yeah. I totally agree. I just want to add I'm wearing Matzo Traders too. So, very in demand, okay, and it's actually outside if you guys want to check it out. Really, really cool booth. So I want to shift gears and talk about the food industry, Ben. So how do you feel that industry is progressing in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I'm truly really optimistic about where things in lots of different industries are going, and especially in food. I find that consumers across the board are engaged. They are self-educated. They are the ones asking questions now. They want to learn where their food's coming from, who their food is coming from. And when we take, food is such an interesting category to work in. Food is an emotional product. Food is something that we share with people. Food is something that we eat 3 times a day. And people are really starting to care about what their food is, what is inside of it, and where it's coming from. And I truly, I studied business in school, and I was always kind of really intrigued by this idea behind supply and demand, and to understand that consumers demand really what products are made, what goes on the shelf, because if they're not going to buy it, it's not going to be produced, or at least not going to be produced again. Right. And I really feel passionately that if consumers can demand what's being produced, they can demand how it's being produced. And we have just as much a say about what goes on behind the scenes about a product getting to the shelf before it gets into my mouth, before it gets into my stomach. Right. And I think, especially in food, it becomes very engaged and very widespread. And I think the new consumer, the new age consumer, is self-educated. And I'm excited because even out here in our booth, we were getting questions that I couldn't even answer. Yeah. And that says something. That means that we are moving towards consumerism that is truly conscious and truly questioning what's happening and demanding to be better.
Yeah, I love that. I always say our readers make such informed, thoughtful purchases, right? Like they want to know everything behind the scenes happening at a company. They want to know what you stand for. And seeing students really tap into their power is so inspiring to me. And speaking of that, Sam, I want to know what you feel is a good first step for students to take if they want to mobilize and join the fair trade movement and really galvanize their community to do so as well. Yeah,
I can give you all 3 things. One, obviously a lot of you student leaders are already involved, and a shout out to Billy and the team with fair trade campaigns. Yes. You all are amazing. So obviously you're already involved. 2, I'll plug what we're doing because part of the reason I'm here is really to invite you to become Millennium Fellows, and you can go, it's just millenniumfellows.org with 2 N's in Millennium. So millenniumfellows.org, we have teamed up with the United Nations Academic Impact, and we provide free training, connections, recognition to undergrads in 13 countries advancing the SDGs. On any issue that you care about. So if fair trade is your cause and that's what you want to work towards, we want to help you do that work and help collaborate with other networks, other peers, share the movement with them, and vice versa, and build communities of practice all over the world. So millenniumfellows.org is a resource for you. And then 3, there was a conference we did one year where there was a singer-songwriter named Conard. I don't know if you know him, but he, it was amazing. It was during the famine and drought in the Horn of Africa. And so somebody got up in front of 1,000 people and said, Conard, what's that one thing we can do? Is it raising money for bed nets? Like, we'll all go do that thing. Just tell us and we can mobilize millions of people. And it was actually one of the co-founders of Invisible Children, and they proved like 6 months later that they could reach a lot of people. And Conard looked back at him and he said, look, so often when people are, like, you ask that question, it comes from a good place. But so often when people try to help other people, they do it from a place of feeling superior to those that they're trying to help. Mm-hmm. My colleague calls it heropreneurship. Mm. And so we have a saying at MCN, we actually use the hashtag sidekicks unite. And what does it mean to not be the center of the story? And so Kanan looked back at the audience and he said, if I could ask you all to do one thing, it would be to learn about the culture and the people who you're trying to help, or learn about yourself and why you're doing what you're doing. And so that's the best advice I've heard, and I'm happy to pass that along.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really, really awesome. So what would you say to a student who feels that they can't really make a difference at the campus level? I know you guys started, all of you have done such amazing things when you were in college. So how do you combat that kind of misconception?
It's important to empower students and to support each other in that journey. I remember having some problems sometimes at recruitment events on campus because, first of all, you're competing with all these other clubs that have like a bunch of different types of candy. Like, the candy really brings students to your table. So I'm like, there with my fair trade chocolate. I'm like, talk to me. Like, I can convince you. And I remember I had to think of more creative ways to do this. So this last fall, I was at my table at the activities fair, and I'm in a full body banana suit. And this kid comes up to me, and he's just like staring at me. And I'm staring back. I'm like, well, I don't know what's happening right now. Is this a staring contest or what, dude? And so he's just looking at me, and he's like, you're in a banana suit. And I was like, yes, I am. And he just kind of stares at me for a while longer, and he's like, so if I join your club, can I wear it?
That's amazing.
I'm like, yeah, I guess so, yeah. Do you want to hear what we do? He's like, yeah, sure, what's up? And so we had this incredible 30-minute conversation about what fair trade is as a movement, as an ideology, what his passions were. He was specifically into immigration rights, immigrant rights. His parents came to the US from Mexico, and so he was like, I really want to do something around migrant labor. And I was like, fair trade's the perfect intersection for that, and we would love to have you because we're a movement that is trying to find as many members to include as possible. And he was like, well, how do I know that it's credible? How do I see the change? And I feel like that's a big question because so many times we are partnering, we're sidekicking with people that are across the ocean that we can't see, that we can't talk to. I think one of our biggest missions is to try and breach that gap more, to build more connections, personal connections with our compadres. And so I told him, I was like, sometimes you can't see it immediately. It's definitely not an instant gratification. Like, that's really not what social justice is to me. Right. It's a journey. It's a long process, but we definitely have those moments in which we're like, oh, like, this is what our movement's doing. Like, we have been talking about trying to bring more producers to Brown's campus to speak about their experience, and he was like, oh, I'd be so down for that. Like, I want to plan that. And I'm like, amazing. So I guess it's finding what students are passionate about and empowering them to not be a bystander, to not be like complacent because they feel like they're powerless. Because I feel that's so common. Right. But you're right, this movement matters. Like, yeah, we're small and there's the world, the universe, whatever. But like, it's important work. And I think people want to be told that they can make a difference. Right,
totally. What about you, Sam?
In terms of?
What would you tell a student if they felt like at the campus level they can't really make a difference?
So I'm 32 now. So at this point, a decade out, I wouldn't tell them anything. I would listen. And I think that's what older generations need to be doing a lot more of, is just listening. Yeah. Like, young people historically have driven movements, I think, just intuitively understand what is right. and we get conditioned to play it safe, and we have more and more responsibilities, and then it's harder to take chances and take risks for the things we believe in. The best thing we can do is just listen. And so I don't have any, honestly, for all the students here, I don't have any advice for you. I wanna hear from you. Like, after the panel, I wanna meet you. I wanna keep in touch. I'm coming, I know some of you are from Arizona State. I'm there in 2 weeks, and then I'm in LA and in the Bay, and I wanna meet you, and I wanna learn your stories. That's it.
Cool.
Wow, okay, I don't know if I should say anything or just listen. Although I agree, listening is obviously, really important to be in tune with what's happening in your own mindsets and in your own movements. I echo Camila, it is totally a marathon, not a sprint. You won't see change overnight. It doesn't work that way, although we really wish it did. I think the number one thing that I would recommend is truly investing in yourself. We are all kind of mini social entrepreneurs in this big movement, and not to be afraid to put a lot of time and effort into creating the best self that you can become to lead and represent this movement on a bigger scale. This is a movement, this is a vision that is bigger than any of us, singular or even combined, because this is about the future, and this is about investing in our future and creating impact along the way. So I would not be afraid to invest in what you're doing in your own circles, in your own lives, because together we are part of a bigger movement and vision.
All right. And for my last question, I want to talk about how fair trade is viewed kind of in the public imagination. Because writing for Teen Vogue, a lot of times when we speak about fair trade, there's certain assumptions that come across with that. And I feel like I'm really passionate about expanding people's view about what it means to be sustainable and what it means to be eco-friendly for fashion, for food, and for different arenas. So what would you say are some misconceptions about fair trade that you want to disrupt?
It's a good question. One of my big ones is that fair trade is only for like soccer moms, middle-aged white women with money. That is not true. But I definitely see where that misconception comes from. Just the idea that it's kind of an elite movement. I don't think so at all. I think if you think that, you're making it about yourself, and it's not. Fair trade is not about us at all, honestly. Consumers are very, very important. Obviously, we drive the change here, but it's about our producers, and I think that people forget that sometimes when they critique fair trade or the consumers. But I think that the main misconception I want to battle at Brown specifically is that the impact is not quantifiable, like that you can't actually track it. Because I don't think that that's true at all. And I think that we, as organizers, have the ability to breach that gap when people are like, how do you measure if fair trade even works? It's like, there's people I can put you in contact to that you can talk to. There's so many producers with so many stories, and we really just need to share those. And I think that that's gonna take, some time on our part to build good bridges between that. Right. But yeah, this movement is for everyone. And as students, we have the opportunity to not only advocate for fair trade on campus, but also bring fair trade out of campus. Because, campus is a bubble, right? We're surrounded by our peers, by our faculty. And I feel like if we want to make it accessible to everyone, not just the soccer moms, then it's about going into communities, meeting communities where they're at, and teaching, telling stories about the fair trade movement. And I think that's the way to kind of change the image, I guess.
Yeah, very true.
I'm new, so I'm not gonna, I don't have any misconceptions to dispel. I think the big thing for me, though, is just for new people like me, is to help, to educate us in terms of what this movement is and what it represents. At the heart of it, it's about the dignity of people. And, I think there's an opportunity and I'm excited to do it through the Millennium Fellowship and through our community. There's the opportunity to bring so many other activists and movements into this space. There's so many other students who are passionate about different causes. But ultimately, the choices that they're making as consumers and how they're living their values and showing up on campus and in community, that's, does it affirm dignity or not? And so I'm really excited because I think if we all kind of go to that North Star of why this movement matters, why it's so important, we can connect those movements together. And I'm just really excited to be a part of that.
Yeah.
That's great, Sam. I think the best way to sum up the biggest misconception that I understand within the fair trade movement is a question that I actually received at the conference yesterday. And it was a very well-intentioned, innocent question. So if the asker is in the audience, I'm not intentionally poking fun. But they asked, okay, great, you're a fair trade brand. You source fair trade certified ingredients. That's awesome. What are you doing on top of that to support the farmers in those communities? And it kind of made me stop and think, that is one of the biggest misconceptions about fair trade being a charity and being, this kind of fluffy, we give back to farmers movement. We are trading in a fair way with the farmers to dignify them and give them the tools that they need to invest in their communities, provide quality products to us, and really be transparent and fair in the process. We're not there to be a charity organization for them. That's almost more insulting, I think, to those farmers who provide such incredible ingredients for the snacks and food that we enjoy every day. So I think it's important for us to reinforce the fact that we're part of a movement that is supporting farmers in a fair way and not in a charitable way at all.
Right. Well, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions, but first, let's give a big hand of applause for this awesome panel. Thank you guys so much. And if you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and somebody will come by with a mic.
Or I'll throw it like a chocolate.
Okay, don't throw it. I'm here in the back. Somebody? Yeah.
Hey, so throughout this conference, we've heard from producers and we've heard from business owners and everyone that, we really need to keep raising awareness and making it so more people care about this and everything. And I would question if that is the right step, because I would ask, why does the dignity of producers depend on our awareness and depend on how long it takes for that to happen on a large level? And I would say if anyone would agree that it's not okay for us to just wait until everyone becomes aware, do you have any other ideas for how we could spread this faster?
I think from a food perspective, so few people know even where chocolate comes from. The majority of Americans think chocolate comes from a factory in Belgium, when in reality it's the cacao fruit that grows on a tree in West Africa or Latin America. And I think while I do really, of course, support sharing and spreading the message of fair trade, beyond that, I inspire and I would want people to start asking questions about where their food is coming from, where the things that they consume are coming from every day. And once people understand that other people are participating in the supply chains that they are participating in, that there's this big, giant globalized movement of products and things that we enjoy every day across the world. Once you understand that and start thinking about it and start questioning it, you look for the solutions. And one of those solutions is fair trade. So I don't think it's about necessarily spreading the message and awareness of fair trade and fair trade products, because I think that's the solution. I think it's more about getting people aware of maybe where the problems start, and that is a total unawareness of where your food is coming from.
I completely agree with Ben. I think also, I've also thought about this a lot and struggled with it because, first of all, producers and our factory workers, they're disadvantaged by a system by absolutely no fault of their own. And that within itself is a disgrace. And I think that this like white savior complex idea that the US especially is battling with right now, it's not about saving them. It's about using privilege to provide a platform that these people should already have had. And
Yes.
And I definitely think that the way you frame your discussion about things like fair trade and about raising awareness is important. Because we don't want to come off as patronizing or as like, you know, because of us, you are dignified now. Like, no, that's not what it is at all. I mean, these people just want a fair chance. And if we can all support that by buying fair trade or supporting other sustainable brands, other brands and certifications and movements that we know actually provide that, I think that that's what we have to do.
Do we have any other questions? Raise your hand and someone will come to you. Anyone? I think that may be it. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you've enjoyed the conference. It's been wonderful talking to you all. And get some chocolate before you leave. You'll thank me. Thanks.
And thank you. You were awesome.
Thank you.